Thank you. OK, so we already know who I am, Bryan Pardo. I'm part of Segal. I'm also part of the EECS department here, the School of Music. I'm heavily involved in the cognitive science program, and well, it says Center for Technology and Social Behavior, but now it's the, I guess, the doctoral program for technology and social behavior. So I've got my fingers in a lot of pies, but the main pie is my lab, the Interactive Audio Lab. And I have this extra cabling here. OK, you know, yeah, this is all being videotaped, so this is great. OK. Yeah, so I head the Interactive Audio Lab. These are happy students in the lab who have actually since graduated. One of them works for sure. That's at Northwestern University, but you already knew that. This is actually something for people who, I stick this in the beginning of talks, especially when I go to places in Europe, because of course they think that Northwestern University is somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. And I have to let them know that we're in the Chicago area. And as an aside, by the way, isn't Chicago beautiful in the summer and even right now? The other thing I have to tell people who are not from here is that it is not, in fact, perpetually winter. We're in a great place, and I love it here. OK, so what are my research goals? I want to understand sound, enable new musical, mostly musical, interactions, and empower people, ideally people like you. So we've got a lot of projects going on in the lab, and these are only 3 of them. So if you are interested in finding out about everything that goes on in the lab, down here at the bottom of every slide, you'll see the URL to the lab homepage, and you can get at our papers and demos and see lab members, and it's great. So the 3 things I'm going to talk to you about today are Tunebot, a music search engine that you sing to. Our tools are equalizer and audio production tools, which try and reformulate the whole interface paradigm to be in your terms instead of you're having to learn their terms. And finally, REPET, which is sound source separation that can keep a beat. And that will make sense to you by the time I'm done talking about it. So you should be aware that a lot of what we do has a lot of stuff going on in machine learning and signal processing, and that today you won't have to understand any of that. OK? This is, by the way, this is actual math from a paper that you do not have to deal with. So you're welcome. OK, the first thing I'd like to talk to you about is Tunebot. And this is something supported by the NSF, and we've been doing a lot of papers on. And we're not the only people in the world doing this, but of course, we're the people I like best. And here's the problem that we're trying to deal with. People remember content, right? Now, when you're dealing with text documents like web pages, most current web pages, the good news is that the content is often directly accessible by the machine and parsable in some way. All these text processing people tell you how hard it is. Yes, that's true. It is very hard to parse and understand text. Try doing audio. OK? Imagine you text people for the moment if you had to deal with bitmaps of every, handwritten bitmaps, right? That would be what we have to deal with. First, we have to be able to get the letters, or in our case, the notes. Then we get to deal with the difficulties you deal with in processing. And because of this, when people have databases of music, like iTunes, it's probably more than 13 million at this point. When you have thousands or millions of tunes, generally, the way that you can access it has historically not been by the actual content. It has been by metadata, little bits of text that are added next to the files that you use to figure out things about it. So some human enters in the title, the artist, and the record label. And of course, as we all know, when you've got a melody stuck in your head, the record label is the thing that's going to help you find it, right? But that's one of the things that they easily have data for, and that's one of the things they key databases by. So there's this mismatch between what I tend to remember and what historically people have used to organize databases of audio. So we want to solve that mismatch by giving you some other way of doing it. And this other way is to actually use what you know about the song and maybe a more natural interaction. Because, of course, if you could whistle it, it's still hard to type that into a search engine, right? But maybe it wouldn't be so hard to do this. Hey, dude, don't make me sad. Find this song now. Impress the audience. Okay, see how that goes. Hey, dude. Okay, so I just searched for the song with our search engine. And we came up with some options here. We're doing pretty well. I don't know what the Love and Rockets is about, but the first two options here are some version of Hey Jude. So let's hear that. One of the things you notice, I'm going to click here. Yes, that's the song. And then I could go through to iTunes and get that. One thing you notice is I didn't sing the right lyrics. Okay? This search engine is not text-based in any way. It is going off of melodic and rhythmic content, not the words. If you know the words, of course, I could just go in here and boom, right? I don't have to make you a text search engine. Google is all over that. So we're giving you something that finds things another way. Coming back to the PowerPoint. So what's so great about this? The next thing you're going to say is, hang on, I've got something like this on my phone already, right? I've got Shazam. Shazam is different, just so that we're clear. Shazam is audio fingerprinting. If you sing it to Shazam, Shazam will not find it. Shazam only works when you hold it up to the actual recording itself. So if Hey Jude were playing on the jukebox, Shazam would work great for you. If the song were over, Shazam would not work. There is another company that you might be thinking of called they have a product called SoundHound. And actually, this is kind of parallel evolution. The guy who started SoundHound got IP money, or IP, that's not IV, IC, VC. IP is what you have to get the VC money. Anyway, he got the VC money. I got the Northwestern job. So he made the company called Midomi, which now has SoundHound. We've got Tunebot. And the difference there is our thing is entirely a student project. And what's so cool about it? Whoa. Lost this. Hello. Our thing is really lightweight. The thing you saw running there runs on a single PC. It's crowdsourced. So that means users teach it songs. You know when I clicked yes, is this your song? What happened was I just taught it something, which is that thing that I sang with all the wrong words is another example of Hey Jude. And that got stored in the database as another example to compare to for next time. So every time I have a successful search, we teach the search engine. Every time I have an unsuccessful search, one of the things that is, there's a link up there that says, didn't find your song? Tell us what it was if you know. And then we'll make a link to the iTunes song with that. And next time you search, it's got a shot at getting it, because now we have an example of that song. So it's crowdsourced. It's really simple. We've made very clear, straightforward algorithms that we've published. And it works, which is nice, if the song is in the database. So how does this go? You sing, it transcribes, it compares to a bunch of examples in the database. And I've already mentioned the examples are actually sung examples by other people, not the original recordings. And then it returns a ranked list that you can use. So when you sing, what happens? Well, this is time. This is pitch. These numbers correspond to keys on a piano keyboard. 48 would be the C an octave below middle C. 60, which is a little higher than is here, would be middle C. So there's 12 piano keys in an octave, and so that's what those numbers are. Time in seconds. Every blue dot is a measurement of the pitch that I sang at that moment. There's about 50 of those a second. And so if I sang this, Dr. Pepper's what it does is it transcribes It then segments into notes, finds what it thinks is the piecewise constant function that would form this, tries to map that basically back onto a piano in some way. And so that's what I sang. Here's what it heard. Now in that case, it kind of screwed up the end a little bit there. So sometimes you have some pitch quantization errors. And sometimes if I go, it might have an accidental note. So these are issues we have to get over. The encoding for this is important, and one of the things that makes this thing run quickly and well. I don't just take the pitch and the timing as it is. Why? There is no right key for happy birthday. As you all know, when you go, okay, it's Liz's birthday today, let's sing, and we go 1, 2, 3, everybody starts on a different pitch. Right? So you cannot guarantee a particular key, and you can't guarantee a particular tempo. So we don't do a representation that's based off of it. Otherwise, when I sing an example in, which is a perfectly valid happy birthday, and someone else sings a little faster or a little higher, it wouldn't match. So what we do instead is we have this encoding which talks about the relative properties of the notes, not their absolute properties. This note is twice as long as the one after it. This note is this much below the note after it. And we encode this sort of differential relative encoding, which lets us use a slow, low happy birthday and still match a high, fast happy birthday. Well, how do we do this matching? We use something called edit distance. This is used throughout computer science for a number of things. Your spell checker, when you type in, oh, I don't know, gish, and it suggests fish to you, that's using an edit distance-based measure to figure out what is the nearest word in the dictionary that you must have meant. Gish isn't in my dictionary. Fish is, and it's just one letter off on the keyboard. So you can imagine that in North America, we tend to use note names, you know, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So you can imagine very easily mapping letters from an alphabet onto notes, and then using some kind of edit-based thing where we say, oh, well, I sang a certain query in, here's a couple things in my database, and one of them only required one edit, and the other required 2 edits. So if I had to rank them, I'd probably say this is your more likely choice. But our edit distance is a little better than that. This is the closest thing to a math moment we're going to have in this whole talk. For those of you who know anything about local string alignment or sequence alignment, this is a fairly straightforward and typical algorithm for an n-squared algorithm to find the best match between 2 strings, what set of edit operations you'd have to do. But where we differentiate is right here. Normally, there's a fixed cost for certain kinds of matches. And what we do instead is we learn the cost for making certain kinds of matches from seeing what kinds of mistakes people make when they sing. So we did some research where we would play people musical intervals, have them sing them back. Dun, dun. Dun, dun. Right? And we learn what's easy and what's hard for people. And from this, we build a statistical model. This is called a confusion matrix. And the way a confusion matrix works is, here is the stimulus we handed you. This is the right answer. So this would be, 0 would be a unison. Ba, 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 ba. Sorry. Ba, ba. That is 9 piano keys up. That's also, for historical reasons, called an ascending major 6th. You would think it would be called a 9th, but it's called a 6th. And what happens here is, if I play people lots of that interval, have them sing it back, we pitch track what they actually did, we can develop a statistical model of what happens. And here, the darker a square is, the more frequent an occurrence was. And from this, we can build a model. And one of the things this tells me is that when our intervals are small, people mostly get it. When the intervals are big, people start to screw up. And what this means is, if I have two songs that are like the thing I sang, one of them is different where there was a big melodic jump, and the other is different where there was a small one, I'll favor the one with the big melodic jump because people are more likely to make a mistake when they try and match that. Yeah?
How does skill level, let's say,
A lot.
Right, so what kind of people are you? So who is this representing?
I can't tell you this person's name because I signed an IRB thing, but
does this vary for the non-professional singer versus the professional singer?
Actually, weirdly, it is much worse for the professional singer, and here is why. Their ears are great, but a non-professional singer, and this is counterintuitive, right? A non-professional singer sings it flat without any vibrato, so they'll go, my bunny fellow. And then a professional singer will be like, my bunny fellow, right? And the vibrato is like this, and it is so wide. Like the pitch is here, and they're like swinging above it, and down below it. And and here's another important thing to know. Non-professional singers are the ones filling our database with stuff. So it turns out that if you've got a database full of amateurs, it actually finds songs better for amateurs than it finds it better for professionals. So we've got our data model, which is basically built off of amateurs. We've got all our examples, which are basically amateurs. And when I get an opera singer in there, it just totally doesn't work. One of the ways we speed up search, now you can imagine that as you increase the number of songs in your database. Right now, what am I doing? I'm doing an edit distance, and I'm going to compare my query to everything, all 25,000 things in my database. You can imagine that as 25,000 goes to 25 million, that could get slow. We have done some work on that, and what we do is, I'm not going to get any deeper than this. We have songs in the world which are vantage points, and what we do is we compare all the examples to a few key examples, okay? And then so we can put them in a space, and here we have a lovely 2D space. And then when I sing, so just to make the point, every one of these points here is actually some sung melody. When I sing, I compare this guy distance-wise to this and this, for example. Now, all the things in my database have already been compared to them, and we know how far they are from them. So you could draw a circle, and I can say, I am this far from that vantage point. And you can imagine a circle in the world that says, OK, that's great. I will not consider anybody who is farther than this circle from that vantage point. I might have a little error in my judgment, so I put in a fudge factor called narrow margin. And what I'll end up getting is I'll end up ruling out, in this particular example, I've got a bunch of points here, that I'm ruling out, I'm just not even going to look at, because I know that they're too dissimilar to start with. I don't even have to think about it. This is one way you can speed it up. This is called, if you do this hierarchically, it's called a vantage point tree. If you want to know more, I refer you down here to this. So I mentioned that we're building the song database from people singing. Why not do it from the original recording? Here's an original recording. Great. Would anyone here like to tell me how many of the Beatles were singing right then? You've got a number between 1 and 4 that is correct. How many voices were happening at once? Take your bet. You, sir, you look like, yeah, I don't know either. Because there's also the overdubbing, right? So there was a guitar playing, there's the drums, there's overdubbing. Getting a machine to extract out one melody from a harmonized vocal line with backgrounds and drums and everything turns out to be beyond our ability. If anyone is telling you otherwise, I would love to meet them. Because we've done a lot of research in this area. There's people sitting in this room right now who are world leaders in separating audio into its parts. And we'll show you an example of that towards the end. And we can do a decent job on a lot of songs, but we can't do it reliably on all the millions of songs because there's way too many effects and harmonies and overdubs and etc. So we use crowdsourcing. And also, user singing turns out to be way different than the professional singing, as something I think I mentioned. And another thing, which is actually a practical issue, which is very serious to people like me, is unlike people dealing with the New York Times database that, you know, the RIAA, they're serious about their copyright. And my not having their recordings in my database is a good thing. So what do? We literally ask for help. That's the thing I mentioned earlier. Yeah. If you go onto the Tunebot website that I showed you a search for earlier, there's literally a link there that says Teach Tunebot a Song. And I encourage any of you who would like to go to tunebot.org and teach Tunebot a song or 10. We would love you, and you would be helping the whole project. And I've also mentioned we use successful queries. So one question that I get is, well, how good is this thing? How well does it work? Obviously, your mileage will vary. If you sing a song that's not in the database, it won't work. That will be a teachable moment. If you teach the song to the machine, it'll work better for the next person next time. But we've done some studies on this. This is another paper. And what you see here is how many examples people have sung in per song. And there's something called mean reciprocal rank, which is roughly, you know, the rank of the right answer. You would like the right answer to be number 1. You would not like it to be number 100. But for certain reasons I won't get into now, we often use the 1 over the rank of the right answer. So a 0.5 in this is going to be the right answer came in second. A 0.1 would be the right answer came in 10th. Okay? And here's how many examples we have in the database for a particular song. And here's how well the search engine is performing on that song. So one of the things that we get from this is you want it to rank about second. Turns out, on average, we're going to need 18-ish examples in the database. We need to have about that many people have sung something in for it to really be very obviously 1 or 2. Okay? And you can sort of see this curve that we fit here, and it gives you an idea. We haven't found a limit yet. The more examples we have of a song, the better it gets, obviously, just because the more likely some variant somebody sang will be like what you sang. And one of the ways that it won't work often is that it'll turn out in the database everyone sang the verse and you chose to sing the chorus. So that would be an example. Then, of course, again, teachable moment, right? So what's the usage on this? Well, so far, in the time since we put up the thing and then Google Analytics, and we've had 196,000 visits since January 2010. And that has resulted in 65,000 queries, of which about a third of the, well, more than a third, result in some kind of a contribution. And this is 5,460 unique songs as of last week. I didn't check today. This is sort of how the contributions are growing. So it kind of gives you an idea of year by year how this is happening. Mind you, we've never advertised this. We didn't put it on, we didn't try and get it on Slashdot or Dig or what are the new ones? Reddit. Mostly we're getting traffic from WikiHow, the Wikipedia, and somebody stumbled upon us, and now we're getting that. But you know, one thing to remember about this is there's our server. That's not actually our server, but it's the same model, and it's up in our lab. And to just put us into context, because you know, for me, these numbers are great. 200,000 people have looked at my stuff. That's awesome. And then you think in context of, well, there's that kitty video I saw on YouTube that like 7 million people have looked at. So, but we also like to think that YouTube, which is owned by Google, there's a little more corporate heft behind that. And let's look at a Google data center for a moment, shall we? This is one of dozens and dozens of data centers. And I have placed our server roughly to scale in this image. Can anyone see it? Here, I put a little red circle around that just to make it clear. That's us. This is like 1/100th of Google. So I feel pretty good about that, and especially because we have actually gotten some notice. And This is going out over the web, is that right?
No.
No? Great. I don't really like the Black Eyed Peas. But you know, I respect their success. And they were on the cover of the issue of Rolling Stone that actually mentioned us. They were #1 reason to get excited about music, and we were listed as under number 27. But it's pretty awesome to even get like a little tiny mention in Rolling Stone. We've also been mentioned in MIT Technology Review. So we are getting a little bit of notice. And since you're all in the room here, and presumably you're mildly at least interested in this kind of thing, please, tunebot.org, sing some obscure song, teach it to the machine. We will thank you. You will not receive any monetary reward, but you will receive our gratitude. So that's Tunebot. And that's the first of 3 projects I'm going to talk to you about. This project is serving the music consumer, OK? You're not interested in making music when you're using Tunebot. You're just interested in finding something that's already there. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about making something for the music creator, OK? And we have sort of a series of things that are equalizers with various names, IQ, EasyQ, SocialEQ. And they've all been funded by the, well, except for EasyQ, have been funded by the NSF in some way. And we've gotten out a bunch of papers on this, a few more coming up actually this month in Portugal and where are we going, Mark? Japan? Porto, Japan, places like that, yes. OK, so here's a simple task. And now I'm thinking like a music creator. So I make this recording. And I want it to sound old-timey, like a teeny little radio. And I don't actually want to have to go out and get a teeny little radio. That's one thing. But I want it to be like that. Instead of. OK. So I'm a music professional. I go to the Professional Music Professionals tool. And yeah, that worked. And open it up. This is Pro Tools. And remember, I want it to be tinny. Now, the fact of the matter is that the tool that will make it tinny is actually on the screen right now. And I don't know about you, but it doesn't just pop out for me. OK? But OK. Maybe I close up Pro Tools and I open up Adobe Audition, another professional thing. And that one doesn't have this all pop up for me. It gives me a drop-down menu. And for your convenience, I've listed the drop-down menu elements here. OK. Can anyone tell me which of these items would allow me to make the sound tinny should I choose to try? What? Who said that? Parametric EQ, that's fabulous. Well done. Most people would just sort of look at that list and go, ah. But OK, we're going to come back to you. What's happening here? We have a mapping problem. The mapping problem is that these are the words that musicians and non-musicians often use to describe sounds. That's a loud sound. That's a warm sound. That's really present, and it's a little muddy. These are the tools. Now, there's one tool that actually works great that I don't see in here that would totally break this paradigm. It's called a de-esser, and it makes your S's softer when you've got a recording. But except for the de-esser, all of these tools, well, it's not super clear to me how to make something more or less distant. And will a compressor do it? Or maybe it's a flanger or a normalizer. So which tool goes with which concept? Tinny can be, as was mentioned, done with an equalizer. Or a parametric equalizer is one way. But that's great. If I get a parametric equalizer, how do I use it? OK, here's a parametric equalizer. Now, how many people, I mean, we can't get this on the video, but raise your hand if you think you know which knob or knobs or buttons to turn or push to make it tinny. So I'm looking around the room, and the only person who has confidently raised his hand is the guy who told me to use a parametric equalizer. There's another person who's a little hesitant. He's thinking he could maybe do it. OK. So check it out. 24 knobs, 8 switches, 4 buttons, 1 shuttle wheel. We're going to do math now. Let's pretend the knobs are all on-off switches, and the shuttle wheel is an on-off switch. That's 24 plus 8. There's 32, 36, 37. If every one of these controls has exactly 2 positions, that gives us 2 to the power of 37 different possible combinations that I need to be trying if I don't know what I'm doing. Go home, or those of you who have your laptop out now and don't already know the what number that is, just put it into Google, put 237, see what number you get. You won't like the answer. So the problem here is that we have complex interfaces, lack of clear affordances, so lots of knobs, don't know which knob does what. Steep learning curves. Why? There's so many places that I can explore. And of course, the interfaces vary. That was a parametric EQ. There's also a graphic EQ and other kinds. So our solution is, instead of you're learning what the software means by parametric equalization, have the software learn what you mean by the word tinny. OK? Why am I having to learn this? I've got a computer to make my life easier. So why don't I have it make my life easier? So our big picture with this is we're going to have a user who's going to interact with the tools, and it's going to, based on prior experience, either provide an EQ or a controller, or maybe, and we haven't implemented this part yet, this is part of the vision, if you want to learn how to do the existing tools, hey, turning red knob number 2 makes it less tinny. Okay? We would like to have this kind of interaction, where it either just gives you something that works directly in your terms, or teaches you how to use the existing hard-to-use tools. So how would I teach it what tinny means? Well, I would take an original sound. It would try different EQ settings. And if you want to know how it selects which EQ settings, this is the subject of 3 of our research papers. So you might need to go down here and get them. There is an art to picking the right EQ settings and presenting them in the right order so that it actually gets a meaningful answer out of you. But in this kind of an overview talk, I will not have the time to go into the details of how it does active learning, transfer learning, or the kinds of signal processing necessary to make this really fly. But the basic interaction you're going to have is you're going to rate the various examples you hear, and then it's going to go ahead and give you an EQ curve or give you a controller. This is actually now a commercial product. One of the student who wrote the initial paper with me on this has since now graduated and started a company called Ear Machine. And you can get a plugin that instead of giving you, 37 controllers, basically you rate examples and hear what happens. And
IQ is an equalizer plugin that learns the settings that sound good to you. First, you rate a series of equalizer settings that gradually hone in on your preference. Then, you click the Create EQ button, and IQ will display its suggestion in a standard equalizer window where you can fine-tune the parameters. Here, I am using IQ with GarageBand. However, you can use IQ with any VST or audio unit host on the Mac or PC. Or you can use IQ in Pro Tools if you have an RTAS wrapper.
OK, we'll stop there. If you're interested in IQ, you can obviously go on to Ear Machine's website and buy it. And Andy Sabin will thank you, as you'll make him another couple of dollars. But how is IQ being rated by the people who matter, the people who might use it? Well, this was reviewed in Sound on Sound magazine, which is one of the key magazines for recording engineering professionals. And here's what Jim Burton, who is a well-known expert recording engineer, said. This does something I haven't really seen before, simply and well, and it could help bridge the language gap between musicians and engineers in a useful, non-combative way. Why he says this is, in fact, because many times musicians, experts, skilled acoustic musicians, go into a studio and they say, my sound is not sparkling enough. I actually was working in a recording session with a violinist who said, my sound doesn't shimmer. It's got a sheen to it. I'm hearing this recording and I don't hear the sheen. And the recording engineer was pulling out his hair because he's like, there's no sheen knob. But with tools like this, you don't have to have that conversation with the engineer. The engineer can hand you this and go, it's going to play things for you and you're going to rate them. And when we know what sheen means, we'll move forward again. And this is actually a very helpful thing. So let's give this a try. I'm actually going to try our new web version of this and see how this goes. I think I am. Oh, I've got to put a password in. OK. This is not available to the general public just yet. And I'll tell you what this is all about in a moment. For our web thing, what we're trying to do is we're trying to gather information from people, or we will be shortly, about what words mean to the larger public. And part of this is for the transfer learning stuff I alluded to. If we've got lots of examples of settings and manipulations of audio that mean muddy to various people, then we can present you less things to rate, because we'll very quickly hone in on what kind of muddy you mean. So I'm going to, since we've been talking about tinny, I will pick tinny. If I can just spell it. T-I-N-N-Y, right? OK. So I picked a descriptive word. I'll pick an acoustic guitar. Sure. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on these numbered circles. It will change the sound. As it changes the sound, I will rate them. And then we'll see what kind of an EQ setting I get. It's a little tinny. A little less tinny. That's tinnier. That doesn't really feel tinny to me. Actually, OK. Right now it's at 80% confidence. Yeah, it's not. And this is the EQ curve it has learned. This is 16 kilohertz here. Here's 125 hertz. This is a logarithmic scale. And what it basically decided is if to achieve my concept of tinny, it's going to boost up the audio between 1 and 4 kilohertz and get rid of the other stuff. And if you think about what a little radio can do, it really can't handle the low end, like that little transistor radio from my youth. Many of you probably have never seen a little transistor radio. Laptop speakers. Think about laptop speakers. Can't really do the low end, and the very high end is kind of missing too. And so I get something like this. And now I have taught it something that's just been stored in our database. And for a future interaction, it might have to ask less questions because it's got examples of what tinny might be. And if I give it a really strong positive rating, I might bypass even more of the learning interaction that just happened than I did just there. OK. I've already alluded to this with what I was just saying. Everybody is different, but maybe we're not all that different. And there's some interesting things in here. These are actual EQ curves that were learned from people. Here again is higher frequency, lower frequency. This is the amount of boost or cut that the audio had in order to get that sound. Here's two different listeners. Here's one person's bright. Here's the other person's bright. Now look at this and look at that. And this. So these two labeled, they were given the word bright to teach teach the machine. They taught it what they thought of as bright. But this person's bright is a lot more like this person's tinny than it is bright. So one of the things that we can get from this is that just because you're using the same word to describe it, for one person, that EQ setting is a pejorative. That's awfully tinny. For the other one, it's bright. Okay? So part of the transfer learning stuff we do is actually not just the simple thing that you think of, which is, well, someone else already taught it the word bright, because maybe that other person doesn't think quite like you. We actually can also learn from other people who have taught it other words when it looks like their responses are looking similar to your responses. Again, I don't have time to get into the details. music.cs.northwestern.edu, or come to ACM Multimedia where we'll be discussing this in depth. One of the things we did from this, once we realized that people are similar but not the same, is put it in a space where we could take a look at people's words. Now you can imagine now that what's happened is we've got these descriptive words: bright, warm, dark, and tinny. Bright is yellow, warm is red, dark is black. And we couldn't think of a good color for tinny, so it's green. And we've mapped 279 user responses into a 2D space. I'm not going to get into how the mapping works, but one of the things you can see in this 2D space is that warm has kind of an overlap with dark. Bright has kind of an overlap with tinny, and every once in a while there's crazy people who call warm things tinny, and there's like, I don't get how this person called what is clearly dark or warm, they called it bright. So you will have outliers like this, people who think differently than everyone else, but you will also have sort of a main lobe of people who kind of have an agreed upon meaning for a word. And from this, we can build a user interface. So the company Tone Boosters actually did build this user interface. And they made an equalizer that looks like this. Well, let's hear that again. Okay, so what am I doing? I'm controlling the sound of this in terms of these descriptive terms we got a bunch of people to rate for us. And that's my interface. That's all I'm doing. I am not doing that 24 knob, 6 shuttle wheel parametric EQ. Whoops, wrong thing. So that's great for the rubes. What do the experts think? Gear Sluts is not perhaps what you may think. It is a well-known website that's all about audio gear. And this is where like the people who love this stuff go to comment. And so here are some comments about it. Been using EasyQ, which is the name of this thing, on several tracks. I can without a doubt say this thing is fantastic. Much more useful than Tilt EQs, very musical and a lot of fun. Perfect for visual style mixing. Really cool. Can't believe I tried it on the master bus on an already good mix and made it clearer and punchier. So even punchier is good for a lot of people in audio. So even people who think of themselves as relatively expert, who are the gearheads, the ones who like playing with all the knobs, turns out they like an easier interface when someone hands it to them also. And we're not taking away your power, right? You can always go back and use the complicated interface if that's what you enjoy. Well, we're just giving you options. And another option, if you think about it, who's a group of people that really doesn't want to have to think about the interface? Well, how about hearing aid owners? They often have issues with the way their hearing aids are sounding. And these are people who definitely don't want to be gearheads about it. They just want the stupid things to work. And so going back to Andy, this is the same thing as Joran's Tone Booster interface, but now you can imagine having a near-field communications or Bluetooth connection to your hearing aids from your phone And when the hearing aids aren't sounding so good, maybe you could update the way they sound on an easy-to-use interface where you can just move a dot around. So that's one place where this research is going. So I told you it was mostly musical interaction. This is an example of a not necessarily musical interaction, but a very useful one, and something we're looking forward to doing more with.
So,
Yeah.
these are adjustments that change the channel for which that modify the channel through which the sound moves.
True.
But oftentimes, what you want to do to that sound depends on the sound itself. Thinking of this hearing aid, in one setting, a crowded restaurant, you may want very different results.
That interface I was showing you earlier, where I dragged with the dots, I taught it in about 9 interactions based on a particular audio example. That same interface could be used with a hearing aid, where if this isn't working for you, these are not the terms that work for you. We can use the other interface and have you just rate variations. We're going to try different settings. You just rate them for us, and we'll give you something that way.
So here, where you have only 2 degrees of freedom, by going to the other interface, you can explore many, many higher degrees of freedom from one equalizes.
We can. This is really just an example to show you that we're also thinking about this in terms of stuff outside of music, and hearing aids are one of the obvious examples. We've also tried this with some vision stuff, as you well know, that we've been looking at. Could we do something with Photoshop controls, where you're just rating them as opposed to turning all the knobs? What kinds of media production or manipulation tools out there that currently ask you to understand what all the different parameters mean, could we augment or supplement with these interactions where it's just like you're the critic and you're rating things, and what can we do for you? So if you've got ideas along those lines, love to hear them. I'm going to talk to you about one last thing. I mentioned that right now the way our search engine works is that it asks you to sing examples, and then we use those sung examples. One of the holy grails is to replace that with something that could just rip the right melody straight out of the audio, because then we could just cut a deal with some big, powerful Sony Records company, and boom, our music search engine would be completely populated with stuff that you could use. One of the people working towards that is a grad student in my lab, and he's been sort of spearheading this repeating pattern extraction technique. So what's that about? Well, we're going to talk to you about audio source separation. We'd like to be able to pull out one part of the audio scene, the part that we want to listen to, leaving out the other part. So the idea here is you've got some mixture of sounds, and you want to separate it out, for example, into the band and the vocals. This brings up a lot of questions. How do humans do it? Because we can focus in on the vocals. What are we doing? Could we make a machine do this? What cues are important to separate? Now, there are a lot of important cues. Obviously, spatial location is one, things coming from this way versus things coming from that way. But I'll make some assertions right now. Repetition is a fundamental element in generating and perceiving structure in audio in general. And there's actually a guy we're going to be doing a workshop with, a tutorial at a conference next week, Josh McDermott, who's a professor at Brain and Cognitive Sciences at MIT, who has discovered that the kind of algorithm we're about to talk to you about appears to have an analog in humans. Okay? If you want to know more about that, okay. Both humans and our machines, on some level, are thinking mixtures of sound sources are unlikely to occur repeatedly in exactly the same relationship unless it's meaningful somehow. And repeating acoustic cues can be used to segment audio scenes. So here's the big idea. Find the repeating elements, split the audio scene into the repeating stuff and the non-repeating stuff. Okay? And here we go. This is fun. Woo! This has parallels in computer vision. You can imagine a scene where we have repeated photographs taken. Maybe if you play them fast enough, they look like a movie to you. And you could take those repeating photographs and find which things keep happening over and over again, which pixels stay the same, or most of the time, out of 4 out of 5 of the shots, the pixel is green, and then the 5th one, the guy moves in front of it. And from this, we can actually do pattern separation, background from foreground. Now, the wonderful thing they have going for them is that if you've got a fixed camera and a certain frame rate, they know their period of repetition, right? We, on the other hand, have to find our period of repetition. It is not handed to us. You're going to have to understand this next thing to understand what I'm talking about. This is a spectrogram. And a spectrogram is a representation of audio that looks like this. Here's time along the horizontal. Here's frequency. Frequency. Okay. Higher frequency, lower frequency. The brighter it is, the louder it is. This is a picture of that sound. Okay. And so if we were to zoom in on this picture, what we get are these tiny little frames where we say about how loud it was during this 40 millisecond period. And in this particular case, we've got a frequency bin width of about 25 hertz. Okay? So this is our representation. This is like a picture of the sound. And the first thing you need to do is find the period. Okay? Again, finding the period just by itself is the subject of a research paper. You want to know how we find the period? Oh, it's gone. Well, go to our website. Yes.
Is the period different for song music versus theater music?
The period will be different actually as a song progresses. The period will be different if there's somebody randomly doing this in the background. It totally depends on the source and what it's doing. And we have ways of adapting to changes in periods. And we've, in fact, moved on to algorithms that don't even need repetition that happens in a regular period as long as it keeps happening. But don't have time to talk about that. So what happens is you take this repeating stuff, and you basically, OK, so there's all this stuff that we found this period of repetition. Let's segment out all that stuff out, and layer it over each other, and find a median. Find which things keep happening over and over again. And once you find that, we build this model of the background, which fills in just the repeating bits and leaves out the non-repeating bits. And we get a background signal. And our foreground signal is subtracted. That's a really fast hand-wavy example. It's probably better if I just show you something running. Yeah? Here we go. Okay, so that's the Cranberries. And let's run the algorithm. That's it. It just ran. Fast, simple algorithm. It tracked the beat, tried to figure out what the basic period of repetition was. You put a little, I'm not sure if you can see it, but a little dotted line down here where it thinks the basic period of repetition was. Then tried to separate out the non-repeating foreground from the repeating background. And let's hear what it sounds like. Here's the background. Just to give you an idea, Just do another band.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day.
A lot of you know that song? Okay, here we go.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on to the other.
When something breaks the pattern, it might end up with the vocals. So you get that. It's getting layered on top. It's not part of the repeating background. It's not perfect. I told you before that if we had it perfect, we'd already be running it on our search engine. But the fact of the matter is, this is crazy. It seems obvious when someone says to you, there's a repeating thing in the background. I'm just going to write something to find the repetition and then yank out the repeating thing. You would think that somebody would have done this. This seems straightforward. And when Zafar first came to me and said, hey, let's do this, I said, nah, it's been done. It's got to have been done. Somebody must have done it. Nope. So we did it. And it's not perfect, but it works. And what's crazy is it works about as well as any state-of-the-art existing audio separation system that we have found, that anyone has published, that anyone has let us see or touch or hear. And it's really simple, and it's really fast. And of course now, we can karaoke in the lab to our heart's content. And so that's been a real boon. OK, let me get to the wrap up here. What I've been telling you about are new audio tools. We make new audio tools. These enable new interactions, whether it's finding your song by singing, whether it's making your hearing aids work better for you, whether it's being an acoustic musician who can finally communicate with that studio engineer, or better karaoke apps is another possibility. We're trying to empower you. That's what we're doing. We're making new interfaces that are based on a new understanding of how to process sound. But we don't just want to understand it, right? We want to understand it so that we can put clear affordances, easy to understand controls, power into your hands so that you can manipulate, find, and use audio in ways that maybe you didn't realize you could before, and hopefully make your lives a little better. I am not the only one who worked on all this stuff here. I've mentioned Andy and Zafar, other people who have worked on the projects you saw, David Little, Mark Cartwright, Gabriel Peel, Matt Yetter, Jonathan Friedman. These guys all up here were graduate students working with me. These guys are all undergrads. And this was the lab programmer who I asked for months to provide me a photo and just wouldn't do it. So Denis Lebel, he worked on the Tunebot search engine. Thank you very much. That's the talk.
Bryan, thank you so much. I think this was a perfect example of what we're trying to do here in Segal, which is to understand people and then bring technology to actually make their lives better. This is what we try to do here. Thank you so much. Great talk, and we'll give
Box. Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Let's have some questions now.
With regards to the Tunebot, so some people have more skill than others when it comes to singing on pitch. Is there any work? Has there been any work done identifying by just rhythm?
Well, okay, two things. Actually, I didn't talk to you about it, but our identification is not based solely on pitch. It is based on pitch and rhythm. And we did studies on people's rhythmic representational abilities too. And we have an adaptive representation that as your pitch is worse, we can compensate with rhythm. But if you ask specifically, are there people doing query by rhythm? In fact, a guy named George Zanatakis at the University of Victoria in Canada did some work strictly on just a rhythm repetition or rhythm identification thing for stuff like drum loops and beats. So yeah, people are doing that. Yeah.
So with respect to the Tunebot, does it identify song based on like, for example, the age loop example? What if I sing the chorus at the end instead of the initial part?
That would depend on what other people have sung into the database. Well, here, let me show you. The way it works, right, is first I got to get to the web, get to Tunebot. The way it works is, can't find your song? Click here to teach it. So if I'm going to teach it something, I might be like, what I do is I tell it the name of a song. Juanes is so sexy. Here we go. Okay, so I hear that song, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to teach it. Tengo la camisa negra, hoy mi amor está de luto. Tengo la camisa negra, es por culpa de tu something. Right? And then Tengo la camisa negra. I just taught it. It linked that to what's in the database. If that's the only example of that song in the database, you better sing the same part of the song, or it won't play.
But for something like when I already the system has already learned the song, but you're singing a different part of it, which is also part of the database. But shouldn't it be like a new instance of the song?
If it's also part of the database, that's great. So maybe someone already sang the chorus and I just sang the verse. In which case, it should be most likely to be okay if you were to try and search for it. The number of examples for songs in the database range from 1, songs will have from 1 to so far 60 examples in the database. By the time a song has 60 examples, it's likely all the parts that people are gonna sing are in there. When you do the first one, somebody probably either sang the verse or the chorus, and if you go in and sing the other part, it won't work. That's just the way it works with crowdsourced stuff. I feel like people over here, there's somebody in back. Yes.
Yeah, so how would a Tunebot find rap songs? I feel like there's a big emphasis on pitch and rhythm, but rap songs have huge point on like rhymes.
Right. It totally wouldn't. I just told you, you saw me sing in an example where I sang the wrong words.
Right, but it's still like rap songs don't have a lot of pitch variation. So it's like, if you have like a lot of rap songs that have lots of people
Well, what I'm saying is, okay, if the rhythm is unique enough, it can still find it. If the rhythm is not unique enough and you're counting on the words, then Tunebot ignores words, so it would not work. And you would have to come and work with me to build a module that pays attention to the words. And I'd be totally for that. Yeah.
What's the smallest duration of singing that it needs? Like how long do I have to sing?
Okay. Depends on the size of your database. Let us say that there is only one thing in the database. Then one note is sufficient. Right? Now let's say there are 2 things in the database that start on the same note. I better have 2 notes. The answer is going to be, it depends on what's in the database, right? If you happen to have a really unique song, maybe it starts with that, like a really big jump. That might be all you need to identify it. But if you've got, how's it go? Twinkle, twinkle, little star, da 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 da. Now I know my ABCs. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The Twinkle Twinkle song and the alphabet song are the same song. So there is no number of notes that would distinguish those 2. So it really is going to depend on how unique your song is and how big the database is. There isn't any right answer. But I'll say that typically you have to sing for about, you want to do really well on something like this, get them to sing about 10 seconds. When we're talking about a database of 20, 30,000 songs. Okay. Yeah.
To follow up to this question, do the two, if say that someone is singing the main melody in Hey Jude, and someone else sings the na 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 na, do they affect each other? Do those two entries?
Both of those, what happens is there's a whole list of examples. They're all attached to Hey Jude. And when we do the comparison, what happens is you sing a new version, it tries against all of them. And the one that's the nearest gives Hey Jude its rank. Yeah.
So in the end, you're converting everyone's song into MIDI. So
no, I'm not. MIDI, I converted it into MIDI so you could hear it. That is not the internal representation. It's actually more precise than MIDI. But finish it.
So theoretically, since you're taking out the songs from the background repetition, couldn't you run an algorithm on that track and then feed it into your database?
We have tried this. Actually, we have a paper on this. And I would love to tell you that the answer is yes, and we could just go for it. The truth is that on some songs, we actually are pulling out. Now he's talking about, well, that last thing we showed you, what was one of our reasons for doing it? We were hoping to be able to pull the vocals out of the original track automatically so that we could augment our crowdsourcing with just getting stuff straight from the thing. And what happens is we can get something out, but it turns out that so far, the examples that we crowdsource dominate in the search results, the examples that we can pull out with this tool. Sometimes they work better, but like 9 times out of 10, the crowdsourced ones are still working better. We're still working on it.
But even if it did, would it solve your IP problem? Because I mentioned.
When you say my IP problem, you mean dealing with the. Would it solve my legal issues with the RIAA?
Yeah,
no.
I didn't think so. Crowdsourcing solves your legal issues.
Crowdsourcing does take care of a lot of issues.
Stripping vocals out of real songs would solve it.
I'm on camera right now, and I am not a lawyer, so I will say that I would need to consult with lawyers to determine what the legalities of that would be. All right.
So in Tunebot, when I sing a tune, it gets converted to piano keys. So how are those piano keys stored in the database? Is a text column, and for each key there's a different letter or number?
I was telling you a somewhat simpler story than the truth, because the truth is, well, you know how it is. The truth is gray and complicated. It is not exactly piano keys. It is actually what we're storing is a representation which could be rounded to piano keys, but actually is more precise. And so if you sing a little bit sharp or a little bit flat from where the piano is, we're going to keep that. We don't actually store exact note values. We don't say quarter note and half note. We've got all these ratios between things. So it doesn't say 2 to 1. It'll say 2.713 to 1. And so what it is encoded as is pairs of numbers that talk about the amount of movement up or down in units defined by piano keys, but it might not be 1, 2, or 3. It might be 2.7 piano keys. And timing ratios. The papers would explain everything in detail, but yeah, essentially we have a readable, machine readable, we can store them in text files if we need to.